So what we've been talking about this whole month at Brain Club is that um, the idea is by learning your own brain, learning about your own strengths, your own challenges, you can strive for niche construction, which is designing a life based on your own brain's needs and strengths. And so, all through the month of June, we've talked about this concept, we've talked about access needs, we've talked about communication, communicating these access needs. We've talked about supports and services that that can facilitate our creating our best lives. And now tonight, we will apply this concept to employment. The concept is that by getting to know your own brain, you can then reflect on your current situation. What's working well? What's not working? What would work better? So if, for example, you have the kind of brain that is constantly thinking and talking about brains, well, you might quit your job and start a nonprofit where you get to think and talk about brains all day. That's an example of niche construction. But short of that, we are going to hear from panelists today to talk about what this process has been like in their own lives. Oh, screenshot it. Oh, yeah, it gets recorded. Oh, for sure, totally. So what goes into designing a neuro-inclusive workplace? And All Brains Belong, one of our community projects, is a neuro-inclusive employment bright spotting program where we are, it's still open, looking for nominations from community members to nominate Vermont employers that are using concepts of inclusive design to create environments where all brains can thrive. And what we've, and then we contact them, we study them and interview them and learn from their experience. And so what we have found thus far, which it's the concepts that come out in the research too, which is that what goes into a neuro-inclusive workplace, the physical environment, including sensory processing and motor-related access, communication style, the culture, having meaningful work. Those of us with dopamine-bound brains, where we have interest-dependent learning and engagement and motor coordination and executive functioning. So meaning is a common source of dopamine. Having flexibility in choices, autonomy, and flexibility in workflows and routines. All too often, there is a default workflow, a default routine that everyone is expected to follow, because there's one right brain. No, there's not. And so if you have one default pathway and someone has the kind of brain for whom that does not come naturally, that is not neuro-inclusive. So when I do trainings for organizations trying to improve their neuro-inclusivity, we talk about like the simplest lens to view this is, are there defaults? Are there defaults in recruitment, interviewing, the whole hiring process? Are there defaults in the way that people are supervised, the way feedback's been provided, the way meetings are? Anytime there is a default, everyone else is othered.
I'm Tracy. I started my own neurodivergent journey, I guess, like probably 2 years ago. I've been in my current job as an assistive technology specialist for 7 years, and I didn't know much about neurodivergence. All I had heard was of, autism and ADHD, and they were in their own little silos, and I didn't see myself reflected in the definitions in that community, because they weren't really shown there. But I got connected with one of my clients, I think, who I was just talking with, and there was so much in common, which threw me down a rabbit hole, and I did a lot of research on it, and realized that I had a lot of internalized ableism around my own life. And here I was working in the disability community, not realizing that, I was trying slowly to solve all of my own quirks. And that's how I ended up in my job. Luckily, this job fell in my lap. It's a great job for me. I get tons of dopamine from my job. I get to solve problems on the daily, and they're short sometimes, but they're so interesting. And I love working with people in this capacity. And luckily, that's been part of my niche construction is this job that I just kind of fell into. And I found no pushback. I mean, I work in the disability community, so obviously my supervisors are welcoming. When I say I need this, or this works better for me, or the more confidence I brought to that, the more explicit I was about the tools, the accommodations that I needed, the less pushback I got. I didn't present myself as a person with a disability and then expected someone else to solve the problem for me. I brought my accommodations to the table and said, here's what I need. And I think that for an employer, that's easy to handle. This person says I need XYZ. Okay, I don't have to think about it. And that works pretty nicely. So, but yeah, I've been working on curbing my own internalized ableism, working with my executive functioning instead of against it, because every article that you read about time management and to-do lists, they don't really work for my brain. So just turning that around and not going into the shame spiral that Mel described, where why can't you just do this, brain? Why can't you just be that way? And being like, oh no, it's because you just need to be this way, and it's fine. It's like solved a lot of problems in a lot of relationships, at work and otherwise. So that's me. Don't really know what else to say.
I'm curious, Tracy, in your professional life, do you come across lots of folks who are not achieving niche construction in their work life?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
mean, before I had this job, I've had lots of jobs, but when I used to have a management position, and I would find myself hiring people who now I can see were neurodivergent, and it was a horrible fit. And I would be like, you need to do something more interesting, because what you're doing now is making you miserable, which is making me miserable. So you should go do something else. I'm not firing you, but you should go somewhere else. And that happens with my clients too, where they come in and their accommodation list is 900 pages long, like their dream accommodation list for this job. And I'm like, but do you want this job? Do you like this job? Like question number one. So yeah, I think with folks with dopamine bound brains, like finding something that's interesting and that you like, especially in this employment market, is ideal.
Yes. All right. I am going to queue up a video. Oops, no, don't start playing the video yet. I always say that part of my own niche construction should be that in because we really do have a culture of interdependence here. Like it is totally normal and ideal to be connected with other people and rely on one another. So I have that was a brain rule I had to unlearn because of how independence is glorified. Like autonomy is essential, but independence is a brain rule for the computer. Okay.
And with my experiences, now just for example, the childcare workforce sector, I'm actually an early education teacher. I'm actually a teacher. But the way that workforce looks at me as, they look at me very, very strange. They look at me as, why is there a man in an early education childcare workforce? Which usually that's predominantly held by women. But for me, it's the reason why I joined that workforce is the love and compassion I have for all students of Vermont. Literally, I love that work, that type of work. And being discriminated against within that field is a problem. It really is. It's not only a society problem, it's a Vermont problem. as you can see, it's, it's ingrained everywhere where we work, in our workforce. For me, it's very, very disturbing that the workforce is, of Vermont as a whole is starting to see a lot more declines and turnovers than actually having people hired that want to be welcomed into the workforce. And with me, it's probably because the reason why I can't get hired, or there's a lot of barriers to that. One is you're on SSI and SSDI programs. There's already barriers to that, and they will let you know that if you proceed or go toward for employment, we will cut your benefits off. No, they do not care if it's even a part-time job anymore. They updated that. If you get a job, they'll cut it off. It's just, on people that, that really want to, be self-independent. And they can't get that if the workforce or the society of, of these programs or services are going to work for them. It's an accessibility problem too as well.
I'm just here because, so I am autistic, and I did not know this until a few years ago, about 2 years ago. And so, I've been navigating most of this, not realizing I was autistic, kind of knowing I guess I knew I was not neuroconforming, or I was neurodivergent, but I mean, I won't get into the whole long story of my misdiagnosis and everything else, but basically, I've as an ecologist, I've worked lots of different jobs, to some extent just from being autistic and bouncing around for various reasons or things not being good fits, but also just because that's kind of how a lot of ecology, especially early career ecology jobs, are designed. And of course, I want to caveat that I've got all kinds of like luck and privilege and everything else. And it's a hard field, and I got into it in a time it was easier. And a lot of people who are, I'm sure, better at it than me aren't here, so I want to recognize that. But just also, I just wanted to be here to kind of be thinking about the different, since I've had all these different jobs, my current one is like amazing. And it was the job I was at when I found out I was autistic, and I've talked about it with my supervisor and my coworkers, and it's been this really affirming and amazing experience, which is so different from what I hear about from others. And, it might be because I'm a white man, I'm basically agender, but I'm male looking, and I am obsessed with weather and plant. I'm kind of a walking autistic stereotype, which is why it's kind of funny I wasn't diagnosed. But that being said, it's been really affirming. And I think at other jobs, it would not have gone that way. And I know it hasn't for a lot of other people. Yeah, I think I'm really lucky, and I have started talking about it with other people around the state of Vermont, and I have been really surprised. When I kind of came out of the autism closet, or whatever you want to call it, I had no idea that there was really a stigma. And I just was, I'm autistic, ooh, and so I'm running around, and then I find out no one else I'm the Agency of Natural Resources. I don't know of any other person who is openly, and I know there are people who are neurodivergent, but I don't know of anyone else who is openly autistic. And there are not very many. It is very white, and I know there are people who are LGBT and oftentimes aren't disclosing it. I had several people tell me they were ADHD after I did a little brown bag talk with people. I did a little talk with people about being autistic, and that was kind of how I told everyone. And people came up to me and told me they had ADHD or other things. But yeah, it's just this kind of, I'm a little scared, but so far it's been great. But also I'm just interested in other people's experiences.
I remember when I was working at a childcare center, my position was as a floater, which meant that I didn't know what was needed of me or expected of me or what my day was going to look like until I was there. And I remember having a big conversation with my boss and being like, okay, this next year around, I can't handle this. And I feel that my showing up here, my attendance and being a good employee is being impacted when I don't know what's expected of me. We had this big, long talk, and then she like reformatted it that, floaters would be assigned to specific rooms. So you would have at least know where you were going to be, who you were going to be working with and everything. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. And then I remember having, and it like, oh man, it puts a little ache in my chest. I remember feeling so like proud of that and everything. And then walking by and hearing someone be like, you mean I have to do the same thing every day? And I was like, oh my gosh, I just ruined that person's life. Like now that person is going to have to do the same thing every day. And it's all my fault. Cause you know, I have a control over all of their feelings. But yeah, so the idea of being able to have more freedom of what is expected of you in the day, be it someone who needs something different or someone who needs to be able to replay it over and over again on the way there, what they're going to do, that would be incredible.
Yeah, I have a question. So I'm a nursing professor, so I teach nursing students, and a lot of them have accommodations. It's a growing number of people that have accommodations for things like quiet testing environment and extra time on tests and things like that. And a common conversation among faculty is, you know, there aren't these accommodations in the real world of nursing. So how do we prepare our students to be in this environment? Are we doing it? The conversation is always that we're doing them a disservice by, which is ridiculous, but the question still stands that how do we prepare people and prepare, like that environment seems to be making very little change in any sort of fast direction. And I guess it's, you know, how do we help set people up? Like Matthew, you're talking about all the things that floaters do and the things that teachers do. Like, what can we tangibly do to help with that transition from school to workplace in ways that are going to set people up for success and enjoyment and fulfillment in their careers?
I can, Laura, I can just chime in from like a healthcare provider standpoint, and you know, just because I think this really relates to brain rules versus world rules, pretty much because everything does. Like, it is a brain rule that you get thrown to the wolves and that's the end goal for your professional life. Like, that makes no sense. So if you are, you know, actually I have two things I would say to your question. By the way, there's a, yeah, thank you. Yes, we agree. Your daughter's adorable, Charlie. Anyway, so, you know, when we think about accommodations, we are not giving extra advantage over other people. What we are doing is we are taking a barrier to access and we are making that barrier less. So we are not saying, okay, nursing student, you are getting extra time on a test, which gives you an advantage over other people. We are saying that because of the way your brain attends, reads, writes, whatever it is, we are giving you a workaround for your brain to be able to do the thing. So when we, as a person with disability, when we have a job, we also need to have those things. We need to look at any barriers to access and meaningful participation, and accommodations need to be specific for that. They're not random. So it's not like a thing you get just because you're a student and do the thing. If you still need the thing, you get the thing. That's disability inclusion. That's how that goes. The other thing I would say, and then looks like Mel's got their hand up. So this idea that you will be in a healthcare environment that has a default, that's not going to end well, right? So if so, like, you know, in medicine, and I imagine in nursing, there's different choices of your environment. When the environment is a mismatch for your brain, you are not going to have a good life. So, you know, it is probably very important for someone to know when an environment, when a culture, when a sensory experience is not a good fit for their life.
And I work in the construction world, and I'm actually a consultant to a lot of construction companies. And so through learning more about my son, I started to realize how prevalent neurodiversity is amongst my clients and their employees, like many, if not most of them. And a lot of the work we do is about supporting business owners to have more successful companies, you know, and a better work environment, better work cultures. And so one of the things I've really grappled with is, in particular, there's often a transition that happens where people work in the trades, like on the job site. And if they show any signs of leadership or good communication or leadership, organizational skills, then they're often promoted into a leadership position. And something I've seen happen frequently, and I'm not sure how to address it in our work, is there's this very specific definition of what like a lead carpenter or site super or project manager should look like. And they're often taking people from the trades who may or may not be neurodiverse and trying to move them into this. And it's a lot of my work is supporting people to become project managers or to gain leadership skills. And I guess where I struggle and where I see employers struggle is what is part of the job, you know, and the skills required as part of the job, and when they're being reviewed, like in a performance review, and saying things like, oh, this person's disorganized, or this person's not able to stay on top of these tasks, or their communication doesn't look like we want it to look. It becomes very complicated, particularly when there's someone who isn't necessarily diagnosed. And so there can't be the same kind of conversation around accommodations.
One, when you talk about like successful companies or better culture, like like operationalizing that would be helpful. Like, what does success look like, and kind of like reframing what success looks like, because it might be that success doesn't mean you get promoted on this default track. Maybe success means that if the niche construction is your success, meaning like, what are the things in the environment, the culture, the communication that make that individual person feel self-actualized, right? So there's that, because what ends up happening a lot of times is that, you know, within a given set of demands, the brain can do the thing. And then you keep taxing and taxing and taxing. And then finally, when it is that your capacity becomes outstripped by your demands, then things start getting dropped through the cracks. And then because we have so many brain rules, meaning things we think are universal truths, but are not, those people get judged and shamed. You're lazy, you're defective, you're not motivated, you're disengaged, you're this, when really you've depleted your cognitive resources because your reserves have been outstripped by your demands. And so when we think about, you know, the myths of what it is to be a good leader, the brain rules of leadership, which is that, yeah, exacerbated by masking. Pressure to mask is going to further deplete your reserves. Anyway, so now, and then the brain rules of leadership are such that, well, now I have to do the thing, and I have the pressure to do the thing, and I'm expected to do the thing independently. But really, we want to think about in a culture of interdependence, where the person who has the responsibilities, those responsibilities are supported, accommodated, shared. Like even me, I like run a nonprofit, and like my executive functioning is outstripped on a daily basis. And I have people that help me do most things here, because otherwise I can't. My disability would be completely incompatible of being an independent professional. That, you know, we can come together and support one another in shifting the community culture. And we have the opportunity for like this next generation to not have to unlearn stuff if they just learn it the right way, which is that there is no right way. Like, I mean, can you even imagine if like little kids actually learned in preschool that there's no right way to think, learn, and communicate? Then it's like the only thing they've ever learned. Right. And in the chat, the amount of suffering this would prevent, absolutely. Because, you know, in 2022, I have 6-year-old patients who are already getting the message that they are broken and defective and they're not doing the thing. And so anyway, and that's honestly just like by my own story in the setting of autistic burnout, of having an employment situation that was not working for my brain. I was also envisioning, like, I had a then 3-year-old and I really wanted her to grow up in a completely different culture, where like we've been talking about brains since she's 2, and she knows she's autistic. She's proud of her brain. She walks around, she's just like, I have a kind of brain that needs vestibular input right now. Like, she's amazing. And like, it's just, yeah, shout out to Luna for being incredible, absolutely. And like all the little kids, even typically developing kids, who I'm just like, did you know that we all have different brains? And they're like, oh, sweet. And like, even a typically developing kid who's like, picks up a toy and like does a thing with it, I'm like, oh, that's so interesting that your brain did that with it. My brain did this with it. And like little Johnny this morning, not little Johnny because of HIPAA, but like, you know, somebody else did something else with it. Like, we all have different brains. And they're like, oh, cool. So that's how it could be.